We begin today's Shir on Daf Pei Zayin, 9 lines from the top, at the point at which the Gemara begins following the Mishnah. In our previous Shir, we learned the Mishnah, and the Gemara will pick up from one of the points mentioned in the Mishnah. Specifically, the Mishnah described at the beginning a Bas Yisrael who married a Kohen, had a child from the Kohen, and then the husband died. She then married a Levi, had a child with him. The husband died, and she married a Yisrael and had a child with him. The Mishnah went on to describe that scenario where the children that the Bas Yisrael had with the Yisrael and with the Levi, those children died, leaving the Bas Yisrael with a son from the Kohen. So that, without going over all of the details of the Mishnah, but the Bas Yisrael, when she had married the Kohen, she gained rights to eat Truma, and with the bearing of a child with the Kohen, even though the husband died, the child gave her Truma eating rights. In the course of time, with the other marriages and births, she lost the Truma rights, but with the death of the children from the Levi and the Yisrael, we saw that Bas Yisrael mother went back to eating Truma because she was left with her Kohen son. So the Gemara wants to focus on that, this whole idea of the woman going back to eating Truma as in the merit of her having a son from the Kohen, even though, as we said, her husband, the Kohen, was dead already. So our Gemara. By the way, we have a little arrow that indicates to look back at Pei Vav Amid Beis, and if you have Pei Vav Amid Beis in front of you, you can see the second line from the bottom of Pei Vav Amid Beis where this Gemara is picking up from. So Meis Beno Milevi, the Bas Yisrael, happened to have had a son also from the Levi, and the son died after the child from the Yisrael died. Toichal B'Truma, the mother is able to eat Truma because of her son, the son from the Kohen. The Hadra Ochla Mishum Beno Minolan. From where do we know this idea of a Bas Yisrael being able to return to Truma eating in the merit of her son, the son that she had with her Kohen husband? The Gemara answers, Omar Rabbi Abba, Omar Rav. The pasuk says Bas Ubas. We should, by all means, look at the side of the Gemara where we have written in psukim that are relevant to our Gemara from Vayikra, Perek, Chof Beis, psukim Yud Beis and Yud Gimel. On the side we have written Uvas Kohen Ki Sieh Li'ish Zor Hi B'Trumas HaKodoshim Lo Sochel. If you're dealing with a daughter of a Kohen who, though she comes from a Kohen household which is entitled to eat Truma, when she marries a non-Kohen she loses that right. And Pasuk Yud Gimel, Ubas Kohen Ki Sieh Almono Grusha V'Zera Ein Lo V'Shava El Beis Aviha Kinurea. A Bas Kohen, when she becomes a widow or divorced, and she has no children from the husband that was a non-Kohen, so she's left without children from them. V'shava el beis avia kinura, she goes back to her father's house as she was beforehand. Milechem avia sochel v'chozar lo yochal bo. She goes back to eating from the food that her father was eating from them, the truma tithes that he was receiving, but a zar is not allowed to eat from that. A zar is a non-Kohen. In the pasuk that we just read, we saw the word Ubas Kohen. The vav of that would appear to be the source of including not just a Bas Kohen, but a Bas Yisrael that happens to have a son from a Kohen. That's what Rabbi Abba said in the name of Rav. Bas Ubas. The Gemara asks, Keman, Rabbi Akiva, the Dorish Vavi, is this halacha then based on the opinion of just Rabbi Akiva, who places an emphasis on the extra vav in a word, he is the one that's known to darshan the Vov. The Gemara says, Afilu Tema Rabbanan. We don't have to limit this ruling to the Shlita, to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. We can say, even according to the Rabbanan, Kula Ubas Kro Yiserahu. The entire word at the beginning of Pasuk Yud Gimel is in effect an extra word. Being that in Pasuk Yud Beis, the subject of the verse was a Bas Kohen, it was possible to write this verse, Pasuk Yud Gimel, without the entire word Ubas, so that when it comes to making drushes, when it comes to expounding on verses, we aren't limiting ourselves in this case to Rabbi Akiva, who places emphasis on a singular letter Vav, but rather when it comes to an entire extra word, that's something that even the Rabbanon would agree is the source of new information. And in this case, it is the source of the halacha that a Bas Yisrael that has a son from a Kohen can resume eating truma because in the merit of her son. When we say resume, we're talking about a scenario where she had been married afterwards. After she was married to the Kohen and had the child, she was married then to other men, at which point she had to stop eating the truma. The Gemara continues, and maybe before we continue with the Gemara itself, we glance at the side. We have a nosei mivneh heading. You'll see a triangle featured, and this represents Mekoros, sources, Lebas Kohen, Almona o Grusha, Choseres L'Truma, V'lo L'Chosev Hashok. So now a word about Chosev Hashok. We're going to deal with the issue of a Bas Kohen who becomes a widow or divorced. She goes back to her father's house, as we said before, to resume eating Truma, but she does not resume the eating of the sacrificial portions that a Kohen receives from sacrifices. Even though before she was married as a daughter of a Kohen, she was entitled to eat the Chosev Hashok. Those are portions, the names of the portions from sacrifices that Kohanim receive. But in the case of a Bas Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen, who happened to have married a non-Kohen and then becomes an almona or a grusha, a widow or divorcee, she does not resume the eating of Chosev Hashok. Truma, yes, not Chosev Hashok. What is the source for that? So we will discover quite a few opinions as to what Pasuk serves as a source for that information. Tonu Rabbana. We continue now in the Gemara. We have a Tanaic source, Kashi, Choseres L'Truma V'Eina, Choseres L'Chose V'Shok. This, as Rashi says, is a reference to the Pasuk that we read. Pasuk Yud Gimel, Bas Kohen Kisia Amar Grusha V'Zera Ein La. That Pasuk, when she goes back to her father's house, we say she goes back to eating Truma, and she can, we've said actually not just a Bas Kohen, but the woman who happens to be a Bas Yisrael that had a son from a Kohen. So in our Rashi, there is a distinction, however, that's made between the Bas Kohen herself versus a woman who had a child from a Kohen. And what's very interesting to note is a point of contrast. It might be something that one wouldn't have thought of on their own, but we'll see later in the Gemara this point is emphasized, that a daughter of a Kohen, when she had married a Zar, and then he died and she becomes a widow or is divorced, she goes back to eating Truma and not Chosev Hashok. However, a woman whose entire association with Truma is in the merit of her son, that would be the case of a Bas Yisrael that happened to have a son from a Kohen, she is entitled to resume eating not only of Truma but of Chosev Hashok as well. So we'll come back to that later in the Gemara. Our Gemara continues, Omar Rav Chisda, Omar Ravina, Bar Shilo, Mikra. What is the pasuk that indicates that a Bas Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen, when she becomes an almona, or a grusha, after having been married to a non-Kohen, and she goes back to her father's house, she goes back to Truma and not to Chazar v'Shok. The pasuk they quote is, He betrumas hakodoshim lo sochel. This we saw already, Perek Chof Beis of Vayikra, pasuk Yud Beis, and the pasuk says, He betrumas hakodoshim lo sochel. What does that mean? Bemuram min hakodoshim lo sochel. Muram is that which is lifted up and separated from sacrifices that she does not eat. So truma, yes, truma is the tithe taken from produce given to Kohanim, but not portions from sacrifices that are given as gifts to the Kohanim. That she does not eat. Rav Nachman Omar Rabba Bar Avua. The pasuk says milechem. Milechem is a word that you find in pasuk Yud Gimel, and milechem, the mem is emphasized here. Velo kol lechem. Lechem is a word literally meaning bread, but we'll say it means the food, but the mem is a limitation letter. It's a prefix that limits, and that means only some of the food, velo kol lechem, not all of the food. Prat lechazar v'shok. This is to the exclusion of the chazar v'shok portions of sacrifices that her father will receive, but she does not. As you can see, we have a bracketed section, and on the side of the Gemara we indicate the following, the starred note. Matras HaSograim, the purpose of these brackets, Lishma Retzef Atshuvos, or Makoros, where we want to maintain a continuity of the sources, or answers to the question of what is the source, Laha De'ena Choseres L'Chos V'Shok, regarding the Bas Kohen not going back to her father's house for the eating of Chazar v'Shok. So, when you skip the bracketed section, you see Rav Safra in a triangle number 3, following that Rav Papa, and then 2 lines after that Rava, all giving sources for this idea that she doesn't resume eating Chazar v'Shok. Now, in the brackets, the Gemara raises a suggestion that when we say that she goes back to her father's house, but not fully back to her father's house, maybe it's coming to exclude something else. So, Maskif, we continue now with the bracketed section. Maskif lo Romi bar Chamo. Emo, why not say, Prat lahaforas nedorim. Prat means to the exclusion of, haforas nedorim is the voiding of vows. A father, when dealing with his daughter, a father has a right to annul the vows his daughter makes. What happens in the case of a woman that had left her father's house, and then after being widowed or divorced goes back to the father's house? So the father does not resume the position of one who can annul her vows. Let's take a look at Rashi further down on the page in the narrow lines. V'emo prat la foras nedorim, v'lo temo, and not say ki hechi de l'inyan truma hodra lemilsa kamaisa tehader nami l'inyan nedorim. Just in contrast to truma, let us say that yes, she goes back to truma, but not to haforas nedorim. So maybe that is what we are to learn from this. A Gemara responds, Omar Rava Kvar Poska Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael. As far as the exclusion of a return to father's role in annulling vows, that is covered by another source. There's already a source for that. So that when we learn the psukim here that indicate a limitation to her return to truma and not to something else, we don't need our psukim here to serve as the source for excluding haforas nedorim. That's taken care of in another place. And that other place is now what the Gemara shares. The Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael. The following source was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael from Sefer Bamidbar Perek Lamed. V'neder almana ugrusha yokum oleha. the vows of a widow or the vows of a divorcee are to be fulfilled. Yokum alel literally means arise upon her, but if she vowed, she had better fulfill them. Ma talmud lomar. What do I need this pasuk for? V'alo mutza michlal av mutza michlal baal. An almona or a grusha, widow or a divorcee, she's not in her father's house, and she's not in a husband's house. So who would annul her vows anyway? So that the pasuk would be seemingly telling us the obvious when it says that the vows of a widow or a divorcee must be maintained, must be fulfilled. That's obvious. Ella harei shemosar av l'shluchei habal o shemosru shluchei av l'shluchei habal. Imagine the following case. A man has a daughter that he is giving over to another man in marriage. So a father gave his daughter over to agents, emissaries, agents sent by the husband to pick up his new wife. Or the agents of the father delivered the girl, the daughter, over to the agents of the husband. And en route, the husband either died or decided to divorce her. Heich ani korei ba. How should I refer to her? How should I describe her? Beis avia shelzu o beis bala shelzu. Is she still considered part of her father's house, since she hasn't completely left his house? She hasn't yet arrived in the new husband's domain yet? Or is she considered as part of her husband, the new husband's house? And as a result of that, if you say she is considered part of the new husband's house, so the father would not be able to annul her vows. But we can look together at the Rashi in the lower part of the narrow lines. Beis avia shilzu hoyo v'lo yotzu legamri v'yochol av lofer. Should we say that since she's merely en route, so she hasn't really left her father's domain completely, and therefore the father could still annul her vows? Oh, Rashi goes on, O beis balo shilzu varehi kishar almona v'eno av mefer. Or do we say that since she was en route to the husband and she was in the company of the husband's agents, so she's left her father, and therefore the father cannot annul her vows anymore. Lakach yotza mikra hazeh lo marloch. Therefore, this pasuk comes to inform us, kevan sheyotzasa, since she left the father's domain even for a moment. And let's pick up the reading of the Gemara now. Elo lo marloch. This pasuk of neder almana grusha comes to tell me, kevan sheyotza shol achas mirshus ohav, since she left for an hour her father's domain, shuv eino yochol lafer. He can no longer annul her vows. It's a permanent loss of authority over her vows. So that when the Gemara at the beginning of the bracketed section suggested, as Rami Bar Chama suggested, maybe in the psukim dealing with what the woman goes back to when she goes back to her father's house after becoming an almana or grusha, she goes back to truma but not to something else. That other thing is not a reference to Haforas Nedarim, because Haforas Nedarim is covered by this source, the Bamidbar Perek Lamed. Therefore, when we suggested above, she goes back to her father's house for eating truma, not for something else. That not for something else is a reference to the chazeh v'shok, the sacrificial portions. That's what she does not go back to eating. We continue in the Gemara. Number 3, Rav Safra Omar. Again, we're dealing with the issue of a bas kohen. When she becomes an almona or grusha, she doesn't go back to eating chazeh v'shok. Mi lechem avia tochel. From Pasuk Yid Gimel, Rav Safra sees lechem v'lo basar. She goes back to eating bread. Bread is representative of that which grows, produce, but not meat, not the sacrificial portions. Rav Papa Omar, mi lechem avia tochel. lechem hakonui lavia. When the pasuk says, from the bread of her father she eats, that was taken to mean bread that her father becomes the possessor of, the owner of. Prat lechazav v'shok, to the exclusion of the sacrificial portions, to mishuchon gavoa kazachu. Now, literally, it means that he gains merit in eating the chazav v'shok because he derives it from the heavenly table, which means the Kohen, when he eats truma, he's eating something that is given to him as he now becomes the owner of it. It becomes his possession. Chazav v'shok, sacrificial portions, we don't say he becomes the owner of it, but rather he has a right to it. He's given a right to eat chazav v'shok from the divine, lofty table, the altar, so to speak. So there's a difference between being considered the owner of something as opposed to someone that has rights to something. So that when the pasuk says milechem avia tochel, according to Rav Papa, the lechem avia means something she gets the right to eat something from to eat that which her father is the owner of. Lechem hakonui lavia. Number 5, v'rova omar v'es chazei hatnufa v'es shok atruma tochlu b'mokom tahor. Ata uvanecha uvanosecha itoch. So this is a different pasuk, but from Vayikra Perek Yud pasuk Yudalin, and what Rava sees in this pasuk, the pasuk of course is saying that the chazei hatnufa shok hatruma are the sacrificial portions. Don't be confused by the word hatruma, because truma means something that's lifted up and separated. In this case, we're talking about portions separated from the sacrifice that are given to a kohen. And the pasuk says the kohen together with his sons and daughters eat it. Bisman she'itoch. That means when she is with you. But once she marries, she's not with you, the father, anymore, and therefore she does not continue. She doesn't resume eating that. Only when she is with you, meaning she starts off with you and hasn't left you yet. But once she leaves you, she doesn't go back to the chazav v'shok portions of the sacrifice. Omer Rav Ado bar Ava Tana Kishi Chozeres lebeis avia. The source tells us that when she goes back to her father's house, Chozeres letruma ve'ena Chozeres lechazav v'shok. A bas kohen, when she goes back for truma and not for chazav v'shok. Now this is in contrast to the other case, and we mentioned this before. Bishvil beno chozeres af lechazav v'shok. If a woman is bore a child from a kohen, and through that child she has the merit of eating the portions given to kohanim. So we're told in this source that a woman who is eating in the merit of her child, she has a right to eat even the chazav v'shok. Let's take a look at Rashi, the end of the narrow lines, Kishi Chozeres Bas Kohen. That's a reference to the Bas Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen, who becomes an almona or a grusha and has no children. So she goes back, and we said for truma, for the produce, tithe of produce. Avol Bas Yisrael Chozeres Lechol B'Truma B'Shvil Beno Kigon Yolda Mikohen V'Nisis Yisrael Umeis. A Bas Yisrael who married a Kohen, had a child, and the husband died. The Kohen died, and actually Rashi says she had a child from the Kohen, and then after her husband died, she married a Yisrael, and the Yisrael husband died during that interim period when she was married to the Yisrael. So she lost her Kohen identification. But when the Yisrael husband dies, Chozeres af lechazav v'shok, she goes back to eating even chazav v'shok. The Gabi Bas Kohen Ksivi Miuti. It's only in the context of the Bas Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen, that we see limitation. We don't see limitation in the case of the Bas Yisrael that had a child from a Kohen. And since we don't see a scriptural limitation, though it might appear to be paradoxical, but that's what we see from the verses. Let's continue in the Gemara. Oza Rav Mordechai Omra L'Shmaitzu Kamei Rav Ashi. Rav Mordechai said over this teaching to Rav Ashi, Omar Mehecha Ka Misrabya. From where do we learn the Bas Yisrael gets to eat Truma because of her son? Me Ubas. This was a reference to the pasuk that we saw earlier, pasuk Yud Gimel, Bas Kohen Kisya Almona Grusha. So from that extra word, we included not only a Bas Kohen, but a Bas Yisrael that had a child from a Kohen. She also, even if afterwards she married Yisrael and lost the Truma right, when the Yisrael husband dies, she goes back in the merit of her son. So that's the source for the Bas Yisrael eating Truma. So we ask the question, Mi Adifa Lo Mina, can the rule of a Bas Yisrael who eats in the merit of her son be greater than the rules that apply to a Bas Kohen? The Bas Kohen herself, she does not go back to Chazar V'Shok. So how is it that you're telling me that the Bas Yisrael who eats in the merit of her son does go back to eating Chazar V'Shok? The Gemara answers, Hasam Ksivi Miuti. In the case of the Bas Kohen, you have limitation expressions. Hacha lo ksivi miuti. In the case of a woman who eats in the merit of her son, you don't have limitation expressions. We continue in the Gemara with a quote from the Mishnah, Bas Kohen shenises Yisrael v'chulei, Tanu Rabbanan. We have a Tanaic source, and we also have an introduction on the side under our topic heading, the Nosei, and we'll read that together. Bas Kohen Shomeres Yavam O Mu'uberes, the daughter of a Kohen whose husband died, leaving no children, but a surviving brother. So she is a Shomeres Yavam. She's waiting for the brother-in-law to marry her. Oy Mu'uberes, or she's a Bas Kohen that happens to be pregnant. O Sheyesh Lo Vlad, or she has a child. So, of course, a Bas Kohen that has a child from a Yisrael. So, Lo Choseres. She doesn't go back to eating Truma from her father's house. HaGemara Dona Bekach. Ha'im be'emes yesh tzorech leposuk lemayit mu'beres. The Gemara will be investigating, is it really necessary to cite a pasuk to exclude the pregnant, the Bas Kohen who's pregnant, or it's maybe we can prove that through Kal V'chomer logic. We also have a structural note, the Mivneh, where a double underline is featured. These are hadgoshos. These are a simple means of emphasizing certain terms, lahokel ala kriya, to make the reading simpler. So we have a way to focus on certain points, certain words, as we go through the logic. Now the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanan. V'shova el beis aviha. This was in Vayikra Perichov Beis Pasuk Yud Gimel. We saw this before. We read this pasuk before. She goes back to her father's house for eating Truma. This, of course, was the Bas Kohen who had been married to a non-Kohen, and she became a widow or divorced. So she goes back to her father's house. What's intended by this pasuk is prat l'shomeres yavam, to the exclusion of a type of woman that doesn't really go back to her father's house because she's waiting for the yavam to marry her. So she's bound to the yavam, hence she's not described as someone who goes back to her father's house. Kinureha, also a word in the pasuk, prat l'muberes. This is a scriptural reference to the exclusion of a Bas Kohen who was pregnant with a child from the Yisrael. It's true her husband died, but she's left pregnant. She does not go back to eating Truma. The Gemara now asks, the Brisa asks, V'halo din hu. Is it not so that through logic I could exclude the Muberes from Truma eating? And And what happens now, just by way of introduction, we're going to cite another case. We have the case of Yibum and the case of the Me'uberes. And we're going to create a Kal V'chomer, the result of which ought to be that the Me'uberes will certainly not go back to eating Truma. How do we construct the Kal V'chomer? So let's see how it's done in the text. Uma b'mokoim shelo osa vlad min harishon kivlad min hasheni lefotra min hayibom yet osa ubar kiyalud. Now, for some of us, that might be considered a mouthful. So we're going to go over this carefully. The case of Yibum, where the source says lo osa vlad min harishon kivlad min hasheni. So what does that mean? So you have a woman that was married to a particular husband, and they had a child. The husband died, and then the woman married a second husband. That second husband dies, leaving no children. What is the din regarding the woman and Yibum? Well, if that second husband died leaving no children, but he left a brother, she is not exempt from Yibum. Just because she happened to have a child with some other guy, some previous husband, that has nothing to do with her marriage to the second husband that died leaving no children. So she's not exempt by virtue of the fact that she happens to have a child from a previous husband. So that's what this line means when in the case of Yibum, where we do not view the Vlad from the Rishon, from the first husband, as if it were a child from the second husband. A child from the second husband would certainly have exempted her from Yibum, even though he might have left the husband that she was the second husband that she had as a brother. But if she had a child from the second husband, that she would be exempt from Yibum. Obviously, Yibum is only for a case where the man dies leaving no children. But as far as the laws of Yibum are concerned, the fact that she has a child from the first husband, that's not like a child from the second husband to exempt her from Yibum. So that you see that in the realm of Yibum, there's a certain limitation in how far we go with exemptions. And yet, Asa Ubar Kiyalud, in the case of Yibum, a woman who is whose husband died, but she's pregnant, she is exempt from Yibum. So that Yibum represents a realm where exemption is not so forthcoming. But when it comes to a pregnancy, that does create exemption. Makaim she'asa Vlad min harishon kevlad min hasheni lepoisla min hatruma. In the realm of truma, where the child from a first husband, imagine a Bas Kohen that was married to Yisrael, and she had a child, and the husband Yisrael died, and then she married someone else, and that second fellow died without children. This Bas Kohen, because she has a child from the first husband, from the Yisrael, she is still restricted from Truma eating. So that in the realm of Truma, the Vlad from the first husband does have influence over her. So that the realm of Truma, we see there is more influence than in the case of Yibum with regard to the Vlad from the first husband, where it prevents her from eating Truma. So Eino Din Shinase Ubar Kiyalud, all the more so in the realm of Truma, the pregnancy will have an influence. So that if we want to restate this Kal V'chomer in somewhat superficial, general terms, we would say, in the case of Yibum, where there is no influence of Vlad from the previous husband as opposed to a vlad from the second husband, and yet pregnancy does influence. In the realm of truma, where the child from the first husband is very influential, as if it were a child from the second husband, to disqualify her from truma, all the more so pregnancy should be able to have influence. The Gemara says, "Lo, I don't accept that kal v'chomer. Mali asa ubar kiyolud le'inyan yebom." In the case of yebom dafka, specifically there, the pregnancy will have an effect. Sharei asa mesim kechayim. In the realm of yebom, there's another halacha where the husband died, and then a woman who was married and had a child, where the husband died, and then afterwards the child dies. In the realm of Yibum, the dead is like the living. The fact that the son died after the father died, it's tantamount to the son remaining alive, and that exempts her from Yibum. So in the realm of Yibum, I can see more reason for the influence of the ubar in the direction of exemption, because there's additional precedent for exemption in the form of what we just read, also mesim kechayim. The dead are as if they're alive. The dead son is as if he's still alive, exempting the mother from yibum. Ubar kiyolid and truma. Should we say the same thing in the case of truma, that pregnancy should have an effect? Shalo asa mesim kechayim. In the realm of truma, when the child dies, we don't view him as if he is still alive. And to make it a little more practical, we go look at Rashi's second line from the bottom. Linyan truma shalo asa mesim kechayim bas kayin sheoldim Yisrael umeis bailo v'achar kach beno, where the daughter of a Kohen who had married a Zar, and the husband died, and then the child that they had died, she goes back, she goes back to her father's house. She's not excluded from Truma. So you see, in the realm of Truma, we don't view the dead son as if he is still alive. So with that having been said, I can't make the kal v'chomer before that we tried to do, and through which we would then say that the muberes, the pregnancy by truma, would prevent her from going back to her father's house. Talmud lomar, therefore I need the pasuk to conclude thusly. Kinurea prat muberes. Only through the pasuk will I exclude the muberes, the Bas Kohen who was pregnant from the Israel, I'll exclude her from going back to her father's house. She's a Bas Kohen and eating the Truma. The Gemara now goes on to make a point. Before we read the Gemara text, let's just a word of, let's say, an overview. We just finished a Tanaic source which featured dinim halachas of Yibum and halachas of Truma. There was an attempt made to make a kal v'chomer concerning the status of a meuberes and her being disqualified from resuming truma eating. The logic featured in the kal v'chomer was rejected, and hence we have to resort to the pasuk. On Omid Beis, you'll notice there's a siman 3 lines from the top. But there's that siman, it's a type of mnemonic device to remember, to be able to remember the upcoming Gemara. But several lines after that, you can see, if you count 5 lines from the top, there is a section of Gemara that will continue to the end of the parak, where alternative suggestions appear, suggestions that through kal v'chomer logic, maybe I should come to conclusions other than that which we have established, or other than that which we thought till now. And at each point, after the Kal V'chomer is raised, the Gemara will show that through psukim you cannot conclude whatever you're attempting to conclude. This will be a very definitive, structured Gemara, a Gemara with a very definitive structure to it. 4 alternative suggestions, but each one is rejected by citations where we have diamonds, as you can see on Omid Beis, where Talmud Lomar is featured in the diamond, where the pasuk comes to refute or undo what is suggested in the Kal V'chomer. I sometimes refer to that type of Gemara as a type of intellectual acrobatics, where we try to activate logic to conclude something that is other than that which is accepted. And then, of course, you'll ask, well, if logic would lead you to that alternative, how do we know that what we understand to be accepted is being true? So at each point, at each juncture, the Gemara will say, we know what we know through psukim. But before we get to that section of Gemara, the Gemara has a long point. And let's continue in the Gemara. V'itzrich lemichtav kinurei lemute muberes, v'itzrich lemichtav v'zera ein lo lemute valad. We have 2 scenarios, 2 cases of a Bas Kohen. We featured these in our introductory remarks under the Nosei heading before, of a daughter of a Kohen that will be disqualified or excluded from going back to her father's house, either because she is pregnant from a Yisrael or because she has a child from the Yisrael. And I need to spell out both of these exemptions. One is through the word kinu reha, a word from the pasuk, and the other is the pasuk that says v'zera ein lo, where she has no children, so we say she goes back to eating from her father's house, to the exclusion of a woman that has a child from the Yisrael. So the Gemara reads, v'itzrich lemichtav kinu reha lemute muberes, v'itzrich lemichtav v'zera ein lo lemute vad. We read that already. Okay, so we continue. Di'i kosav. What we have to do is show why is each type of exemption needed to be spelled out, and as opposed to just spelling out one exemption or one disqualification and let me figure out the other from that. So let's see why that could not be done. The kosav rachmona v'zera ein lo. Had the Torah described a woman that had no children, she goes back, as opposed to a woman that has a child from the Israel, she does not go back. I'll tell you, there I understand she doesn't go back. Me'ikara chad gufa v'hashto trei gufi. Originally, when she was with her father, she was an individual. She was one person, chad gufa, one person. And now there are 2. There's the woman and the child that she has from the Israel. So that's we'll say that's a big change. So she can't go back to eating trumavo. Muberes, the case of a Bas Kohen who was impregnated by Israel. The Meikora Chad Gufa, originally she was an individual, was one person. Vahashto Chad Gufa, she's still one person. Granted, she has she's carrying a pregnancy, but she's still one person. Emo Techol, I would have thought that when the Yisrael husband dies, leaving her pregnant, she goes back to her father's house to eat truma. Sricha, therefore I need the pasuk to memaye, to exclude the meuberes. Something I would not have been able to derive from the other halacha, the halacha of a Bas Kohen with a child that does not resume eating truma. The ikosav rachmana meuberes, had the Torah written the case of the muberes as being disqualified from resuming truma eating, well, that is easily understood. The meikara gufa srika. Originally, she is when she was in her father's house, she was a gufa srika. She was an empty body. Srika means empty. She was not pregnant. We're at the top of Omid Beis. V'hashta gufa malyo. Now she has a different kind of body. She's full. She's carrying a pregnancy. So there's a a major change in the lady herself. Avol zera ein law, but regarding the issue of a woman that through the pasuk of zera ein law, we said if she has a child, so she does not resume. The Bas Kohen who has a child from the Yisrael does not resume truma eating. De mekora gufa srika, v'hashta gufa srika. That case, she originally, when she was by her father, she was an empty body, and now it's true she bore a child, but she's empty herself right now. There hasn't been any change. There is no change in her as she is now from the point that she was originally. She was originally Gufa Srika, and now too she's Gufa Srika. Amolo, I would have thought that she is not disqualified from eating the truma of her father. Sricha, therefore I need to memayet that case as well, where I need the pasuk to memayet the case of Yesh Law Vlad. As you can see, we have what we referred to before, Simin. Omar le lo nase maseh b'miso nase lo nase b'vlad yovam utruma ibum utruma simin. This is we'll call it a mnemonic or a memory device in order to be able to recount that which we are going to see later in the Gemara. Before we go through the Gemara, I know that we introduced this before, but let's do it again through that which we've written on the side under the nosei, mivneh heading. The nosei is the structural note, the topic heading, mivneh the structural note. This comment deals with both topic and structure. The Gemara represents, these are nisyonos, lishanois hamaskonos deli'el, attempts to change the conclusions that we had reached before, or we'll say the ideas that we had stated before, through the creation of kal v'chomer logic, shebahemshech idachu al yedei the psukim that are featured in diamonds. The Talmud Lomar expression, which introduces the pasuk, is highlighted with a diamond. So each double underline will introduce we'll say a suggestion, and when the diamond appears, you realize that suggestion is being rejected. Omar le Rav Yehuda mi de askarta l'rova. Suggestion: Lo naase mesim kechayim le'inyan yibum mikal v'chomer. Let us not view the dead as if they are alive regarding evil. So we have to just restate or review what we said before, and then suggest that at this point we want to say other than that which we said. A woman who was married and had a child, the husband died, and then the son died, the child died. We say that a woman like that does not do yibum. Simply, when the husband died, he's a man that died leaving a child. The fact that the child died later, that's of no relevance regarding her exemption from yibum. The way we had stated that before is the dead are as if they're alive. And what do we mean by that? The child that died after his father, it's as if the child remains alive with respect to the mother's exemption from yibum. So whether the son is alive or even if it is dead, assuming of course that he died after his father, the mother is exempt from yibum. And what's the Gemara trying to do now? To say no, let's not say that. And that is in these words, which we'll read again, Lo na'aseh mesim. Let us not consider the dead, namely that son that had died, kechayim, as if he's still alive, regarding yibum. And now the result of this suggestion would be that a woman that had been married, had a child, the husband died and then the son died, she'll now have to do yibum. That would be the result. And why should we say that? Through kal v'chomer logic. Uma b'mokoim she'osa vlad min harishon kivlad min hasheni lepoislo min hatruma. Yet, lo asa mesim kechayim. In the realm of truma, we say that we had a case before of a Bas Kohen that married a Yisrael, and she had a son from the Yisrael. When the husband dies, and she marries a second husband and has no children, nevertheless, the child that she had from the first husband prevents her from going back to truma eating. So in the realm of truma, we describe it as a situation where the Vlad min Rishon it's like a Vlad min Hasheni, to disqualify her from eating truma, to disqualify the Bas Kohen from going back to her father's house. And yet, lo asa mesim kechayim. In the case of truma, if she had a son from a Yisrael, if the Bas Kohen had a son from the Yisrael, and that son died, we don't say it's as if he's still alive. We don't say it's as if the Bas Kohen still has a son from Israel and doesn't eat truma. That's not true. We know that if the son dies, if the son the Bas Kohen had from Israel, she goes back to her father's house, and that's what we mean here. Lo asa mesim kechayim. So we, up till now, we've stated the case of truma, where we say that the Vlad min Rishon in the case of truma is like a Vlad min Hasheni, where that disqualifies her from truma. But yet, we don't say that mesim kechayim. Makaim, in the case of Yibum, shelo asa Vlad min Rishon kevlad min Hasheni lefotra min hayibum. In the realm of Yibum, the fact that she had a child from a first husband, it's not as if she has a child from the second husband to exempt her from Yibum, but rather she is obligated to Yibum. Eino din shelo naaseh mesim kechayim. All the more so, in the case of Yibum, we should not view the dead as if they are alive. And if the child died after her husband, she should be obligated to do Yibum. So why don't we say that? So once again, through logic, using truma as your starting point, you would end off that in a case of Yibum, if a woman was married and the husband died, and then the child that they had died, she would be expected to do Yibum. Why don't we say that? Talmud lomar d'rocheha darchei noyam v'chol nesivoseha shaloim. Here, the pasuk means the ways of Torah and mitzvahs. They are pleasant ways, and all its paths are paths of peace. And as a result of that the Torah represents paths of peace and pleasantness, the suggestion is rejected. What was the suggestion? That if a woman had been married and had a child, the husband died, and then the child died, the suggestion was she should be expected to do Yibum or Chalitza. But D'rochel Darchei Noam precludes that. So if we look at Rashi's second line from the top, D'rochel Darchei Noam, V'zu shehoya lo ben, the woman whose husband died, but he left a child, v'lo nizkika liyavam, and at that point when the husband died and she still had a son, the child from that husband remained alive, she wasn't yavam bound. V'nisei slashuk, and then, she wasn't yavam bound, so she married some outsider. Umeis b'no, and after she married the outsider, the child from the first husband died. Im toimar tachloitz, if you're going to expect this woman who is now married to a new husband, if you're going to say that as a result of the child from her previous husband dying makes her obligated in the mitzvahs of Yibum, so she's not going to marry the brother-in-law, but she's going to have to participate in a shoe removal ceremony. Harehi misgan al baila, by having a married woman going to some previous brother-in-law and having to remove his shoe and going through the spitting ceremony, if you were to watch your wife doing that, what would you feel? So Chazal understand this. Harehi misgana baila, that is, it lowers her esteem or her pleasantness in the eyes of her husband, of her new current husband. Hilkoch al korchoch, since the Torah couldn't possibly set up a woman to be in such a position where she'll become misgana al baila, her esteem will be lowered in the eyes of her husband. Hilkoch al korchoch ben ein lo, when the pasuk says regarding the mitzvah of Yibum, ben ein lo, a man who dies leaving no children, b'shas misa ka'omar vare yesh lo, the mitzvah of Yibum is only applicable to a man that dies and at the time of death he had no children. Only then do we say the widow is obligated to do Yibum. But a man who died and at the time of death he left a child, there is no mitzvah of Yibum to begin with. And just to repeat ourselves, the reason for that is that otherwise you're going to be setting up a woman for a situation that would lead to unpleasantness in the eyes of her husband, as we described. The Gemara now, suggestion number 2. Why not say the following? And here is a truma related suggestion. V'naseh mesim kechayim le'inyan truma mikal v'chomer. What would the result of this suggestion be? Let us view that which is dead as if he is alive regarding truma. That if a Bas Kohen had a child from a Yisrael, even though the child from the Yisrael died, we're suggesting now that she should not be able to go back to eating truma from her father's house as a Bas Kohen. And let us make this suggestion, which of course is counter to that which we were assuming earlier. So let us make this suggestion based on a Kal V'chomer. Let us conclude this based on Kal V'chomer logic. And again, this conclusion would be that a Bas Kohen that happened to have a son from Israel, even if the child died, that she should be disqualified from Truma through Kal V'chomer. Uma b'mokoim sheloi asa vlad min rishon kevlad min hasheni lefotro min hayibum. And yet, also mesim kechayim, mind you, under circumstances in the topic of Yibum, where the child from a previous husband is not viewed as the child from a second husband to exempt her from Yibum. Rather, if the woman that happened to have a child from her first husband remarried a man that died leaving no children, she's not exempt from Yibum. Rather, she is obligated, as if the child is not there. The child from the first husband is of no relevance. And yet, in the realm of Yibum, we say that the dead are like the living. That's the case where the father died, and then the son died. It's as if the son is still alive, and the mother is exempt from Yibum. So, in the realm of Yibum, you can say that it's presented as a realm where exemption is not easily achieved, but there is some area of exemption in the sense of where we say also mesim kechayim. That's in the realm of Yibum. In the realm of Truma, makoim she'asa vlad min rishon kevlad min hasheni leposla min truma. There, the vlad from the rishon has influence on her as if it's a Vlad bin Hasheni, which we know disqualifies the Bas Kohen from Truma. So in a realm where Vlad bin Rishon does have influence, so all the more so we should be able to view the dead as if they are alive. And if she once had a child from a Yisrael, even if the child died, she should not be able to go back eating truma. And yet we know she does. Talmud Lomer, so how do we know she does? How do we know that a Bas Kohen that had a child from a Yisrael, but once the child dies, she goes back to eating Truma? Talmud Lomar v'zera ein law. The pasuk described the Bas Kohen going back to Truma if she has no children. V'ha ein law. Well, right now she has no children. The child that she had from the Israel died. A new suggestion. V'nase Vlad min Orishon ke Vlad min Hasheni linyan yibum mikal v'chomer. Here, what's the suggestion, which of course is counter to that which we said before. Let us say that a woman that was married to man number one, and she had a child from man number one. She then marries man number two, dies without children. But since she has a child from man number one, let us say that she would be exempt from Yibum through Kal V'chomer logic. So our conclusion, we want to conclude something about Yibum. What's the starting off point? We're going to start off with Truma. Mind you, in a realm where, like Truma, where we don't view the dead as if they are alive. Namely, if a Bas Kohen was married to Yisrael and had a son, but the son died, we don't view the dead son as if he's alive to disqualify her from Truma, but she's entitled to Truma. So you have the Truma is presented as a realm where the disqualification is not so easily achieved, and yet also Vlad min Orishon ke Vlad min Hasheni. Yet with regard to a child that she had from a first husband, a Bas Kohen that married a Yisrael and had a child from him, and the husband died and she married a second man leaving no children, but the fact that she has a child from the first husband disqualifies her. So the realm of Truma, where we say it's not so easy to disqualify her, and yet when it comes to the Vlad min Orishon is like Vlad min Hasheni. In the realm of Yibum, where we do view the dead as if they are alive, to exempt her from Yibum. In other words, the dead being like alive do have an influence in the realm of Yibum. Eino din. And by the way, what do we mean by the Oso Meisim Kechayim? As we said already a few times, if a woman had been married to a man and they had a child and the man died and then the child died, the child is mace, but he is viewed as if he's still alive, insofar as exempting the mother from Yibum. So in the realm of Yibum, where we do allow Mesim to be viewed as Chayim, Eino din shenase Vlad min Orishon ke Vlad min Hasheni. All the more so in this realm of Yibum, we should view the child that she has from that first husband as being influential in exempting her from Yibum with the brother of the second husband. And yet we don't say that. We don't say that since she had a child from the first husband, that will exempt her from Yibum upon the death of her second husband who left no children. So how do we know that? Talmud Lomar uven ein lo. When a man dies, leaving no children, there is a mitzvah of Yibum. V'ha ein lo. This second husband died, leaving no children. Another suggestion. V'loi nase Vlad min Orishon ke Vlad min Hasheni l'truma. In the realm of Truma, let us not view the child from the first husband as if it's a child from the second husband regarding Truma. And the result of this suggestion would be a Bas Kohen, even if she happens to have a child from a Yisrael, but that was from her first husband, she married a second husband that left no children, let her go back to eating Truma. And let us say this through Kal V'chomer logic. So you'd have an amazing situation. I say amazing in light of what we take for granted, but here we're going to challenge that through Kal V'chomer logic. We're going to have a situation of a Bas Kohen that happened to have a child from a Yisrael, and yet the mother will go back to eating Truma. Why? Because the second husband that she had married died, leaving no children. So, in the words of the Gemara, let us not view the Vlad min Rishon as if it were the Vlad min Hasheni regarding Truma, through Kal V'chomer. And how does this Kal V'chomer work? So here we're going to use Yibum as our starting point. Uma b'mokoim she'asa mesim kechayim lefotra min Yibum. Mind you, in the realm of Yibum, where we view the dead as if they're alive to exempt her from Yibum, and yet Lo asa Vlad min Rishon ke Vlad min Hasheni. With regard to Yibum exemption, we don't look at the Vlad of the first husband as capable of exempting her, as if it were a child from the second husband, and she is obligated in Yibum. Mokaim, in the realm of Truma, Shalo asa Meisim Kechayim Linyan Truma. In the case of Truma, we don't view the dead as if they are alive. That, namely, if the child that she happened to have from Israel dies, we don't view him as if it's still alive to prevent her from Truma, but rather she goes back to eating Truma. Eino din, so all the more so. Coming off of the case of Yibum, all the more so. Eino din shelo naaseh Vlad min Rishon ke Vlad min Hasheni. Let us not view the child from the first husband as if it's a child from the second husband. And if I'm not going to view the child from the first husband as if it's from the second husband, we'll have a situation of a Bas Kohen that happens to have a child from a Yisrael, that was her first husband, going back to eating Truma. Talmud Lomar, Ein Law. The pasuk that sanctions a Bas Kohen going back to eating Truma is provided she doesn't have any children from a Zar. V'ho yeshla, but in this case, she happens to have a child from the first husband, and that's enough to disqualify her from returning to eating Truma. As you can see, this brings us to the end of the 9th parak, and now we begin the 10th parak of Yevamos, which is known as Ho'isha Rabba. On the side of the Gemara, we have a topic heading, the Nosei, Isha Shaholach Bailo L'Medina Sayam, a woman whose husband went abroad. The Omrula Meis Balech, and she was told, your husband died. Well, a woman whose husband died is now free to marry someone else. V'holcha v'niseis liacher. She goes and marries someone else. V'chazar rishon, and lo and behold, the first husband comes back. What are we to do in such a situation? The Mishnah. Ha'isha sheholach ba'ilum nesayam uvo v'omru lo meis balech. A woman whose husband went abroad, and she was told that your husband died. V'niseis, she married someone else. V'achar k'vo ba'ilo, and then the first husband comes back. Turns out she was essentially a married woman that married a second fellow, which is totally forbidden. What do we do? What do we say? Teitzei mizeh umizeh utzricha get mizeh umizeh. First of all, she has to leave. She is not entitled to remain with the second husband. That's for sure not. She was never married to him. She was really married all along to the first guy. But she must leave the first guy also.